Hi, I'm Caleb. 4 years ago, I wired $5 million to save my family's business. No contracts, no guarantees, just trust. They took the money, erased my name from the company, and sent a lawyer to say I was no longer part of the family. Now they're calling again, asking for help. I didn't answer, not this time. The kettle clicked off just as the last of the light disappeared behind the Denver skyline. I poured water into my old French press. No measuring, no pause, just habit. The kind that sticks after years of making coffee for late-night deadlines no one else believed in. The apartment was silent, clean, sterile. No clutter, no framed pictures. Just me, the hum of the fridge, and a clock that ticked like it was mocking the stillness. Then came the voicemail. Hi, Caleb. We need your help again. Just something temporary. Call us when you can, okay? My mother's voice, sweet and careful like porcelain pretending not to crack. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The steam rose around my face, softening the hard angles of everything I hadn't said in years. She hadn't called in months. Not for holidays. Not for the new year. Not even after the board meeting where they officially removed my name from the company ledger. But now, they needed me. Again. I sat at the kitchen counter, watching the reflection of dust crawl up the window like it was trying to swallow the whole city. And I thought, how predictable. Not even a full sentence into the message and I already knew the ending. A polite plea, a veiled demand, and beneath it all, the same script they'd run since the day I wired that money, $5 million. That was the sum I sent. No contracts, no equity terms, just trust. Family, right? It was 4 years ago. The world was breaking open. Supply chains were freezing. Investors were bailing. Knox Family Organics, the legacy my father bragged about building with his bare hands, was weeks away from collapse. I'd just exited my second startup. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean. I had options, liquidity, peace. And then Victor called. You know we wouldn't ask if we had any other choice, he said. This isn't about bailing us out. It's about legacy. It's about our name. He always said our, like it included me, but we both knew who the favorite was. Still, I said yes. I didn't ask for voting rights. I didn't ask for a seat on the board. I just wired the full amount overnight, from my portfolio into theirs. Back then, I told myself it was the right thing to do, a clean sacrifice. I kept telling myself that as the weeks went by and no one looped me into updates. When my login access mysteriously failed, I chalked it up to IT errors. When quarterly reports were delayed, I offered help only to get brushed off. The fracture didn't come with a bang. It came with a casual email, one that shouldn't have reached me, a forward sent by mistake from the accounting team to my old startup address. I almost deleted it, but something about the subject line, Q2 adjustments, CEO reimbursements, made me pause. I opened it, and then I stopped breathing. A breakdown of withdrawals, suspiciously timed and neatly labeled. Operational support, vendor liquidity, leadership discretion. Except the totals didn't match any open invoices, and I knew, because I'd been watching quietly the way people watch when they're waiting for someone to do the right thing. Instead, what I saw was a rerouting of funds, away from the core business, away from payroll, and into something else entirely. Private accounts, executive perks, personal restructuring debt, and no one had said a word. I waited until evening. Then I called Lissa, my mother. Still called her mom back then. Hey, I started, voice low, casual. I came across something in the Q2 reports. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't misreading it. There was silence. Then she sighed like I'd asked her to relive a car crash. Caleb, please don't start digging up old wounds, she said. Flat, final. I'm not digging, I said, keeping my tone steady. I'm just trying to understand what happened. What happened, she replied, is that you gave what you gave, and we move forward. Maybe you should too. Then she hung up. Victor didn't return my messages. Not that day, not the next week, not ever. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch in the dark, with the stove light casting a dull glow over the hardwood floor. I kept going over it. Every dinner I paid for, every last-minute check I wrote, every late-night call that started with just this once. I had kept them afloat. Me, not Victor, not Lissa, not the marketing campaigns or the legacy stories printed on overpriced herbal tea bags. Me, my capital, my silence. It wasn't a clerical error. It wasn't poor judgment. It was strategy. They took what they needed, and then they buried the trail. What made it worse wasn't the betrayal. It was the performance, the ease, the script they must have rehearsed, right down to the way they smiled in board meetings, hands clasped, voices calm. I opened the old leather notebook I hadn't touched in years, the one from my earliest product design sessions, back when I still believed value meant something. I flipped to a blank page and wrote, $5 million bought their survival, cost me my place. I stared at the words, not because I wanted drama, not because I needed validation, I just needed truth. And truth, once written, becomes something you can't unknow. I didn't know what I'd do next, not yet, but I knew one thing. I was done pretending this was just a misunderstanding. It wasn't confusion, it was a decision, and they had made it without me. The silence after my mother hung up wasn't empty. It was loaded. There's a particular kind of stillness that settles when something you've been denying finally confirms itself, like air turning cold seconds before a storm. You don't need thunder to believe it anymore. You just know. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry. Anger would have been easier, but because something inside me had cracked, quietly. I sat in the dark with the old email still open on my laptop, the numbers taunting me in sterile black font, withdrawals marked CEO reserves, leadership expense, contingency relief, but no vendors were listed, no team bonuses, no infrastructure notes, and the dates matched precisely with the week after my final wire. I checked again, just to be sure, and again. It wasn't error. It wasn't poor accounting. It was extraction. They hadn't misused the money. They'd redirected it from the family business into personal pockets. And not a single person had the decency or courage to tell me. I don't remember standing up, but at some point I found myself pacing my living room barefoot, notebook in hand. That line I'd written hours earlier was still fresh. $5 million bought their survival, cost me my place. It wasn't poetic. It was math. It was memory. It was proof. By morning, I was done guessing. I called again. Victor picked up this time, voice clipped, like I'd interrupted something more important than this conversation. Caleb, he said, cool and deliberate, this isn't the best time. You took the funds, I said. No preamble, a pause, not long. Just enough to calculate the right lie. We used the funds, he replied, for the company. Then why is there a separate account with your name on it tied to a withdrawal labeled executive medical liability? That wasn't part of any operations plan. I had back surgery, he snapped, and we couldn't afford a lapse in leadership. And Lissa? What did she use the wire for? I asked, already knowing. You're digging, Caleb. That's not helpful. No, I said, voice flat. What's not helpful is stealing from your brother and then calling it legacy. Another pause, this one longer. You should talk to Mom, he said eventually. I tried. She hung up. She's under pressure. We're all under pressure, I replied. Some of us just don't make it worse by lying. He didn't respond. Victor, I said, softening slightly, hoping for a flicker of humanity. You said if I helped, I'd be folded in. Equity, leadership, a seat at the table. You promised. He exhaled. That was before everything changed. No, I said, voice sharpening. That was before you decided I didn't matter anymore. He ended the call without saying goodbye. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, listening to the empty dial tone. I hadn't realized how tightly I was gripping the phone until I set it down and saw the faint imprint of the plastic buttons on my palm. This wasn't about bad decisions. This was about intention. They'd made a choice, together, and that choice was to cut me out while keeping the cash. I opened my laptop and searched the company's website. My name was gone. No founding partner, no strategic advisor, not even a footnote on past contributions. Just a clean, curated leadership section. Lissa smiling like a queen. Victor in a bespoke jacket, arms crossed like a man who'd built something from dust. I scrolled to the legacy page. It told a story I didn't recognize. One where the family weathered the pandemic storm by leaning on each other, where unified vision kept Knox Family Organics intact through courage and clarity. I leaned back and laughed, low, humorless. They hadn't leaned on each other. They leaned on me, and then they climbed over me like I was scaffolding. For a second, I let the bitterness swell. But I didn't act on it. Not yet. I saved screenshots of everything, web pages, board documents, the expense breakdown, even the missing name gap. Then I backed them up on 2 drives and labeled the folder, Obituary Draft. Not because I wanted revenge, but because the version of me that trusted them so blindly was dead now. Later that week, a former Knox staffer, someone from finance, sent me a message from an encrypted email address. She didn't write much. You weren't wrong. You weren't even the first. That was all it said, and it was more than enough. Ever found yourself erased from something you helped build while they pretended you never existed? I didn't tell anyone I was looking. I didn't post vague updates or text old colleagues asking for favors. I just started pulling threads in silence. Because when you've been painted as the liability, the last thing you do is act like one. I reopened my backup drive from the year before they locked me out. I hadn't touched it in months. At the time, I saved those files out of habit. Dashboards, compliance records, investor decks I used to help draft when I was still the tech guy who understands risk. Now I combed through them like a coroner dissecting a body. Quiet, precise. Most of it looked the same until I hit the folder labeled compliance_Q3. Buried inside was a string of flagged inventory logs dated 6 months before the rebrand. Notes from the logistics team, discrepancies in shipment volumes, mismatched return records, a warning that a large portion of our new line teas had been mislabeled and redistributed. I remembered this, vaguely. A tense conversation in a group Slack thread, a request for a review, then radio silence. And 2 weeks later, the entire logistics team was consolidated. 7 employees gone overnight, under the label of restructuring. Back then, I hadn't thought much of it. Just another fire in a year full of them. But now, it wasn't just carelessness, it was cleanup. That night, I called Marcy. She'd been head of logistics before she was laid off. She picked up on the second ring. "Caleb?" she asked, cautious. "It's me," I said. "This isn't about anything official. I just need to ask one thing." She exhaled. "You always got to the point. Go ahead. Why did they really shut your department down?" There was a pause. Then her voice dropped a register. "We flagged inconsistencies. Told Victor and the board that the logs didn't match what was hitting shelves. That some shipments were skipping testing. We were told to revise. Then we were told to stop looking. Then we were gone. 7 of you," I said. "Only 3 got severance. The rest signed NDAs to stay quiet." "Did you?" "No," I refused. I needed the truth more than the check. I didn't speak, just listened to the weight behind her words. "Caleb," she added after a beat, "we knew it wasn't you. Everyone on the ops floor did. We knew who covered payroll that winter, who kept the lights on." I thanked her, hung up, and added another folder to my drive. Witnesses. It wasn't for a lawsuit. Not yet. I didn't want a courtroom. I wanted clarity. The kind you only get when you finally stop gaslighting yourself. Because for years, I'd told myself I was too sensitive, too ambitious. Maybe I'd expected too much. Maybe they just weren't good at showing gratitude. But gratitude didn't look like this. Not a week later, I got a call from an old assistant of mine, Melanie. She hadn't spoken to me since she left mid-2022, after things got too political. Her voice was low, like she was calling from a church confessional. "Don't say my name out loud," she whispered. "They're monitoring call logs." "Why are you calling now?" I asked. "Because you need to know what they're saying about you. They're telling staff you were unstable, that you sent threatening emails, that the reason you were removed was for everyone's safety." I blinked. "They're framing me." "Yes, they used the report you filed last year on financial irregularities and spun it into an emotional outburst." "You mean the 2-page spreadsheet of flagged transfers?" I asked. "That one." The absurdity almost made me laugh. "Why now?" I asked again. "Because I saw the board packet," she said. "They're revising history, claiming Levon rebuilt the company solo, that you had nothing to do with the recovery. He wasn't even in the room when I wired the funds. They're rewriting the story, Caleb, and they're hoping you stay quiet long enough for it to become real." I didn't respond, just stared at the wall like it could offer answers. "Thank you," I said finally. "I used a VPN just to make this call. Don't contact me again." She hung up. That night, I stood at the window while Denver drifted into dusk. I didn't cry, didn't pace, just stood still and let the knowing sink deeper into my bones. They hadn't just cut me out. They were shaping a version of me to serve their needs. One where I was the villain, the unstable brother, the angry son, the ungrateful investor. Because people like them, polished, legacy-loving, media coach people, don't like messy truths. They like curated lies. I closed my laptop and reached for my notebook. This time, I didn't write a quote. I wrote an instruction. Prepare the mirror. They'll choke on their own reflection. Ever watch someone twist the truth so well they made you doubt your own memory? I didn't retaliate. Not in the way they expected. No angry emails, no social media outbursts, no desperate voicemails begging for answers. Instead, I started pulling receipts. First, I logged into the state business registry. The company I had wired my life savings into, Knox Family Organics, was no longer listed. The new name? Tate Naturals. Same business ID, same tax number, same executive team. Filed exactly 1 month after I transferred my final installment of $750,000. There had been no shareholder vote, no disclosure, no courtesy email. They hadn't just erased me. They'd buried the name of the house I helped save and built a cleaner monument on top of it. I ran a search through the Federal Registry. Tate Naturals now held exclusive rights to the brand, distribution, and digital assets of the original Knox entity. And my shares? Still listed, but reclassified under a new status, non-voting interest. They'd used my capital to rebrand, restructure, and reduce me into a silent partner, legally, efficiently, and with complete indifference. I sat back, letting the weight of it all sink in, not as rage, but as something colder, precision. The next day, I opened the investor deck they'd sent out in Q2. I knew the format. They'd used the same template I'd built for them years earlier. Slide 1 bragged about a 27% revenue increase. Slide 3 blamed organic churn for a dip in customer retention. But I had the real internal reports. I laid them side by side. The numbers were off, not by accident. This wasn't optimism. It was fabrication. I highlighted key lines: self-funded recovery, internal leadership vision, no outside bailout required. I dropped each screenshot into a folder titled Proof, then created another, Timeline, and a third, Narrative Manipulation. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it all. But I knew one thing: if they wanted to rewrite history, I wasn't going to be the ink they used. That evening, I sent an encrypted message to an old contact, someone who once worked under me in R&D. Her name was Quinn. She'd left during the restructure quietly and never looked back. She replied within an hour. "You're not crazy. They called it strategic exclusion. Said it was cleaner to move forward without you. Victor said you were a quiet threat. Lissa said you were too invested emotionally to be useful long term." I stared at those words for a long time. Quiet threat, too invested. What they meant was, I remembered too much. I had too many keys, and they preferred a house where I no longer had access. Later that night, I got another message, this time from Darren, one of the engineers who'd helped automate the first phase of their direct-to-consumer platform. Attached were screenshots of internal Slack threads. "Levon, she's off the rails. Let her unravel. We've scrubbed the portal." Manager A, "Are we worried?" Levon, "She's not dangerous, just delusional." Intern, "I got a weird email from her last year. Kinda unhinged." Levon, "Classic meltdown, narcissist stuff. Every sentence burned a little hotter than the last. It wasn't just erasure anymore. It was character assassination. They weren't trying to forget me. They were rewriting me, from savior to saboteur, from builder to burden. I closed my laptop and stood there in the dark kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. A strange calm spread through me. Not serenity, not detachment, just clarity. They'd bet on my silence, but I wasn't silent anymore. I was preparing. What would you do if the people who owed you everything tried to turn you into the villain in their success story? Victor called at 6:42 p.m. I let the phone ring until the last second before picking up. He always did better when you made him wait. "Caleb," he said, his tone rehearsed and clean. "We need to talk." "I figured," I replied, walking to the window. The sky outside was the color of iron, muted and bracing. "This about the debt?" A pause, then a chuckle, soft but tired. "You always were direct." "Not always," I said. "That's how we got here." He exhaled. "Look, I won't waste your time. Things are tight again. Supplier backlog, one bad quarter. We just need to bridge to Q1. After that, we're good." I didn't respond. "You're still family," he added. That line landed differently than he expected, like a brick wrapped in velvet. "You erased me," I said. "Changed the company name, blocked my access, lied to investors, and now you're coming back with the same voice you used the first time." Victor was silent. "You want a bridge?" I continued. "Then build one out of the history you buried. Use that." "That's not fair," he said, sharper now. "We made decisions under pressure. We didn't have time for honesty?" I cut in. "You didn't have time to say, 'We're going to reclassify you as a non-voting interest and rewrite the press releases so it looks like you never existed?'" He sighed. "Don't make this messier than it is." "I didn't make the mess," I said, voice calm. "I just stopped cleaning it up." There was a pause, and in that pause, I heard the truth. He wasn't calling out of remorse. He was calling because they were out of runway. I hung up. That night, I drafted a letter. Not emotional, not accusatory, just factual. A clean summary of unauthorized withdrawals, falsified statements, shareholder misrepresentation, and documentation of internal efforts to remove me from all legal and narrative visibility. At the bottom, I wrote one sentence: "If your silence continues, legal transparency begins." I didn't send it yet. I printed it, folded it, and slid it under the lamp on my nightstand. I wanted to sleep with the weight of it near me, not as comfort, as a reminder. The next morning, I brewed coffee like usual. I didn't open emails, I didn't check notifications. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to the post office and mailed the letter, certified, with return receipt requested. 2 hours later, I got an email from Lissa's personal attorney. Subject line: final clarification. Per Section 12 of the Family Business Charter, Mr. Caleb Knox is no longer recognized as a stakeholder or kin in financial matters, effective immediately. One sentence. That's all it took. A legal exorcism, not a goodbye, not even a thank you, just paperwork. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat in silence and signed a final transfer of interest, naming a small business foundation I once donated to as the sole recipient of my shares. No headlines, no grand gesture. Just a quiet act of freedom. What's the calmest thing you've ever done in the middle of betrayal? I didn't throw stones. I lit a match and let the paper trail speak for itself. 3 days after receiving the severance notice, I sent a single, carefully worded message to one outlet, an industry blog most executives dismissed as background noise. They'd covered organic supply chain issues during the pandemic, quiet, credible, exacting. I didn't write an expose, I just forwarded a folder, timeline, proof, narrative manipulation, no commentary, no emotion, just metadata, public records, board filings, and time-stamped discrepancies between investor pitches and internal audits. I didn't need to tell the story. They did that themselves. By the following Thursday, the article went live. When Founders Are Forgotten, the hidden story of Knox Organics. No names in the headline, no sensationalism, just a slow, methodical autopsy. The piece tracked the sudden silence around the original investor, me. It documented the rebrand, the timing, the shift in shareholder rights. It cross-referenced public filings with financial statements. It asked questions, but never accused. And that's what made it dangerous. The piece moved fast. Not through headlines, but through inboxes. The kind of story that gets passed around in private Slack groups and investor dinners. Quiet accountability. The kind that seeps under doors. 2 days later, I got a message from Quinn. Board emergency meeting last night. No press, no vote tally, just Lissa is out. No formal handover, no thank you post. Just gone. Victor sent an internal memo hours later. I didn't get it directly, of course, but someone forwarded it. His tone was clipped, vague. We regret the recent misalignment of vision. We acknowledge past misunderstandings. We are committed to transparency moving forward. I read it once, then deleted it. Later that evening, I got a call from a restricted number. I let it ring. On the 4th attempt, I picked up. Caleb, Victor's voice was lower now, less polished, less certain. You win, he said. No, I replied. I just stopped losing. He went quiet. Then, you made it public. No, I said again. You made it public the moment you tried to erase someone who built the foundation under your feet. You could have handled it differently. So could you, I said. When you forged a legacy and left out the person who paid for the ink. Lissa's devastated. She's calculated, I corrected. He didn't argue. Then, softer. What do you want? That question caught me off guard. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because it was the first time he'd asked. I want my name out of your mouth, I said. Out of your decks, your press kits, your revisionist history. That's it? No, I said. I want it in writing. That I'm no longer affiliated, no longer responsible, no longer cover. Victor sighed like a man who finally realized the fire wasn't going out. You'll get it. I better. I hung up. The next morning, I met with Kira, my old legal advisor. I brought every folder, every email, every financial flag. She sat in silence, flipping page after page. When she looked up, she didn't ask if I wanted revenge. She asked if I was ready for resolution. I don't want a payout, I told her. I don't want the name back. I just want the story to stop being manipulated. She nodded. We can do that. We drafted a cease and desist, filed a declaration of separation, sent certified letters to every board member and investor currently circulating the false narrative. No lawsuit, no PR campaign, just record and truth. 2 weeks passed. Then came the echo. Levon's LinkedIn went dark. Rumors of a past harassment complaint surfaced, linked to an event from the 2022 showcase I hadn't been invited to. No one seemed surprised. They just nodded as if they'd always known. Another email slipped into my inbox. this time from someone I didn't recognize, a former intern. You probably don't remember me. I just wanted to say thank you for not staying quiet. You made it easier to tell the truth about what happened. I read it twice, then filed it in a folder labeled, Kept, Not Forgotten. That evening, I stood on the back steps of my apartment, a mug of cooling tea in my hand, and watched the sun fall quietly behind the buildings. There were no grand victories, no redemption speeches, just space and silence. But for the first time in years, it wasn't silence built from exclusion. It was silence I had earned. Is quiet truth more powerful than loud revenge? The cease and desist was never about noise. It was maintenance, closing a file drawer so I could clear space. 2 weeks after it was sent, I received a slim white envelope in return. Inside was a signed agreement. The board acknowledged I held no further obligation to the company. My name would be removed from all investor materials, website archives, and public-facing documents. They didn't admit fault, but they stopped pretending I didn't exist. And that, I'd learned, was sometimes the cleanest form of closure. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already transferred my shares to the Women Forward Foundation 3 weeks earlier. Amy Tran, the director, called me when the paperwork cleared. "We've already launched a micro-lending program," she said. 5 women-led businesses received funding last week, a food co-op in Detroit, a mobile therapy van in Tucson. I listened, quietly stunned. Not because I doubted the good that could be done, but because it had nothing to do with my family name anymore. "You didn't just leave something behind," Amy said. "You built a way forward." After we hung up, I didn't check the news. I didn't search my name. I let it be. Later that week, I stood before a small crowd at a community co-working space downtown, one of the new programs Amy's team had helped fund. Folding chairs, scuffed floors, real energy. I didn't give a speech. I just told a story. No dollar amounts, no company names, no villains, just this. Power isn't what people take from you. It's what you choose never to give away again. No one clapped at first. They just nodded. A few leaned forward. One man stood up afterward and shook my hand, said he'd lost everything in a family partnership that ended in silence. Not because he did something wrong, but because he stopped saying yes. I told him I understood. He didn't need advice, just a mirror. A few days later, I walked past the old Knox family storefront. It had been rebranded, repainted, relit. The windows were filled with new packaging, smooth typography, eco-labels, zero traces of who had carried the weight during the collapse. I didn't go in, but I didn't turn away either. Across the street was a park bench, the same one I used to sit on years ago, taking calls from Lissa, spreadsheets open, trying to solve the unsolvable before midnight. Now, I sat with nothing in my lap. No laptop, no checklist, just a cup of black coffee and a pen I never uncapped. I watched as people walked past, parents with strollers, 2 students with iced drinks, a delivery guy pausing to stretch his back. It was life, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was locked outside of it. I had stopped proving I belonged in a house that had already changed the locks. And in the stillness, I felt something return. Not pride, not relief, just space. A week later, I opened my journal for the first time since the transfer. On the first clean page, I wrote, "They didn't reject me. They rejected the version of me they couldn't control." I underlined it once, then closed the book and left it there, right on the desk, unhidden. Some truths don't need to be shouted to stay true. They just need to be written, once, and lived from that point on. Ever realized you weren't walking away, you were just finally facing the right direction? Sometimes it's not about walking away. It's about choosing not to stand in places that keep breaking you. If you've ever been made to feel like your worth was conditional, tied to what you give, but never who you are, then maybe this story reminds you. You don't owe anyone your silence just to keep their comfort. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been cut out of something you helped build, or maybe you're still in the process of stepping back? If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below or let me know where you're watching from. And hey, if you found this video meaningful, hit subscribe to follow more real stories like this, because your voice and your peace are worth protecting.